All right, we're going to carry on with part two of the letter to the church of Pergamos. And we ended at the manna, where God spoke about the manna, and we're just going to. Manna in the Bible is actually quite straightforward, the meaning of it and that. All right. So we're just going to look at quickly what it is. So it was collected for 6 days only. You do realize that the Sabbath was instituted here already, although the law of the Sabbath only came late on. But if you go before this time as well, seventh day was things that people weren't supposed to do. You can go and read about it. But the Sabbath has been introduced already in before the law was written. All right, so they collected for 6 days only, and it's for 40 years. This is for breakfast. For breakfast, they had manna porridge. For lunch, they had manna waffles, and for supper, they had manna cakes. All right, so for 40 years, and they had most probably manna served on a side plate of manacles or something like that. But for this has happened for 40 years that they ate manna. It's described poetically in Psalms as the food from heaven and bread of the Almighty, and it's the bread of heaven. But it's the capstone. The capstone verse is John. Is in John. So what I'm going to do is we're going to turn to the scripture. It doesn't look like it's in my notes, but in John 6 and verse 35, it's actually quite straightforward. But this is the capstone of what bread is, and you can go and read it in your own time, because this is a very interesting study, and you can go and look after this why it's given, because before this something happens. And Jesus said unto them, I am the manna, the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. You see, he says two things there. He says hunger, and he says thirst. The woman at the well and the feeding of if you read above, is the feeding. And what did the Israelites moan about in the desert? They moaned about two things: the bread and the water. So you can put any connotation, but that is the capstone of manna. So the white stone is a bit. The white stone is a bit different, because the white stone has a lot of conjecture to it, and there isn't anyone that can figure out what this is. But the conjecture is that in order to get welfare from the state in the Roman time, today we have ID cards, but in those days they used to take a white stone and write your name on it. And white because of the white background, and the black because of the it's easy to see and easy to read. But a white stone, they used to write your name on it, and this would allow you, I think it was a loaf of bread or something, and it would also allow you to go to the games. It would allow you to enter into a pass into the games. So you had to have that stone as a form of identification, and to have that stone you had to do the Roman thing. You understand, as we learnt in Smyrna. So that's the white stone, but that's all conjecture. No one can prove that. So at this moment it's conjecture, but out of all the conjectures there are, that is the most interesting one, or the one that attracted my attention, because that would make sense. because that would go with what happened in Smyrna and why they beggars, why they poor, because they can't even get a loaf of bread, basically. So the church's report cards, so the report card is basically, it's the same as Ephesus. Everything is there. The postscript is after the finishing. So the finishing, the letter finishes, and then there's a postscript. All right. And so the church deals with the spiritual immorality and the practice thereof. This is the whole body of the letter. It's about spiritual morality and to keep you away from the immoral and the practices of the immoral. And do not confuse spiritual immorality with fleshly immorality. Your flesh will 10-1. What is in the heart will come out. You understand? But just remember, let's say this for instance. Let's say the border, my gate is the Euphrates River, right? And we know from Revelations and other scriptures in the Bible that that was a constraint. The demons, the spirits couldn't go further than that. But let's say they put in me immoral practice and I left that area, then would that give them power? So we look at the stretching through the flesh, but it's not. We are allowing what stopped at the Euphrates to go further by me being immoral. Alright, so it's about ambassadorship. So just look at the letter and see the spiritual morality that we are supposed to have, that we are supposed to keep away from and allowing it entrance. So the admonitory to all the churches. So if we look at it this way, then we can see that the first letter is devotion, not just doctrine. Jesus wants your devotion in Ephesus. In Smyrna, it's to endure persecution. And Pergamos is hang on to my name, my singular name. It's purify, ambassador of the fullness of the gospel, not the one of the gospel, not the Jehovah Jireh or the Jehovah this or the Jehovah that or the Jehovah that. The fullness, the one name. Hold on to that. So you must purify the whole, the one. You understand? And the name is always used in the singular. When Jesus speaks here, he says, my name, which means the singular name. All those other names make up one name, the singular. So the applicational to the personal, alright, so it's neglected priorities. So in Ephesus, neglected priorities. So they didn't have time to pray. They didn't have time to love. They didn't have time to go and see the guys in jail. They didn't have time. They neglected priorities. They didn't devote. They didn't have the devotion. They were more about rules and principles. In Smyrna, it's the satanic opposition. Right? Satanic opposition of what we face. And Pergamos is the spiritual compromise. So in Smyrna we face the satanic opposition and we do well. But when we get to Pergamos, we have this spiritual compromise where we are clean, but we put ourselves into the, we marry the world, basically. So you can go look at that from a personal application in your personal life, how it works. And they all had a thing for me. So you can go and do that for your life. And then the promises to the overcomer. The promises to the overcomer, if you don't neglect your priorities, you will eat of the tree of life. If you fall under satanic oppression, the second death will not hurt you. You see, there's a very famous saying in the old times, if you're born once, you die twice. If you're born twice, you die once. Jesus says, be born again. Alright? Pergamos is the manna, the stone, and the name. So the bread, the heart, and the name. The name of God, the singular. Alright, so it's exactly what Balaam taught Balak. He didn't speak bad about the Israelites, but what he did do is he taught the enemies of Israel to compromise Israel. And the way to compromise in Israel is with sexual immorality, in the sexual sense, yes, but spiritually. You can read in Revelations about the prostitute, which is the bride of the Father, basically. It's making this, there's two brides. There's a bride that is clean, that Jesus will lift up. But there's this prostitute that the devil brings before God, and he says, yeah, your prostitute, is that the one you're speaking about? He's speaking about Israel, because they prostituted themselves. Because they marry these girls and they adopt their idol worship. So they infiltrate their thing into the church. Now they don't make it just theirs, they infiltrate, they actually encompass it within. And you'll see how. It's very interesting. Now, who... The thing that gets me is, who is the overcomer? And John answers us in 1 John 5 from verse 4. You can go read the rest, but it's very interesting, because who is this overcomer? Who's this promise been made to? So it says, John says in 1 John 5, verse 4, whatsoever is born of God overcome the world. And this is the victory that overcome the world, even our faith. Who is he that overcometh the world? But he that believe that Jesus is the Son of God. That is who he's speaking about, the promise to the overcomer. John gives us an answer. He wrote Revelations. He gives us an answer in 1 John, who the overcomer is. Because obviously people were asking, who is this overcomer? So he gives them an explanation to it. So let's carry on with the levels of application of the prophetic. Let's get to the controversial. All right. Let us see that the fog might lift for you once you see the three, you understand. But first you need to understand more about the Babylonian legend. You've got to understand about this Babylonian legend. Because this Babylonian legend is how you see this legend will affect how you see Revelations as well. And you can go and read about it in all the scriptures of the Bible. So how it was, Tammuz was born to Nimrod and Samaria. They were associated with the sun god. Now, the story was the days got shorter around about the December, the 22nd. Yeah, in the northern hemisphere. They didn't bother about the southern hemisphere. But anyway, yeah, in this hemisphere, the days got shorter. So what they were saying is, because he was the sun god, he was busy dying. And then when the days get longer, that's when he's resurrected. That was the belief of the Babylonian legend. This is the belief. Tammuz was seen as this god, the sun god, because Nimrod and Samaria, they associated with the sun god. So it was celebrated. How they celebrated this from December the 22nd, the shortening of the days, the sun god dying. They would take a Yule, a log. A Yule in their language means infant, in the Chaldean language. They would take a Yule and they would burn it. And then the next morning they would replace it with a fir tree, a trimmed tree, the next morning. Now, if you want to study more of this, you can go and study it in Jeremiah. It's Jeremiah 10. All right. You can go and study it and you can get some of it, but you've got to know the legend behind Babylon. So that's where the legend is. Mistletoe was fertility, the wassail, etc. All these type of things. But anyway, he dies, a Yule log is burnt. A Yule log means a baby log, an infant. And the next morning it was replaced by a trimmed tree. Sounds very familiar. Alright, so let's see. So Nimrod, who founded the original Babylonian religion, virtually identical. Alright. This guy Alexander Hisov, he writes a book called The Two Babylonians. It is a very classic study. There is actually another book that is that is seen between the scholars as more efficient, and is David Hunt's book, A Woman Rides the Beast. He has really gone in and catalogued this history. Right, it's so he has done a very good job of it. So it's identical. The Sumerians have the Sumerians and Tammuz of Babylon, the Asher, the Lorith, Tammuz of Phoenicia, Isis, Horus of Egypt, Aphrodite, Eris of Greece, and the Venus, the Cupid of Rome. That's what the sun god, the where this goes. Because remember, when Cyrus went into Babylonia, they fled, these priests and that, and they went to Pergamos, and from Pergamos they went to Rome, and all these empires are taking over. And as the empires are taking are taking over, they just changed the god's name, but it's the same practice. All right. So they set up shop in Pergamos, and as control of power ultimately shifted to Rome, the same religious system adopted Latin labels and formed the foundation for pagan Rome. Okay, we're going to look into the Roman background of it. We're not going into all the others, the Greek and the whatever, the Latin labels. And for this formed the foundation for pagan Rome. You see, the Pontifex Maximus, that label actually comes from Pergamos and places like that. That's not a Roman thing. That all those Pontifex Maximus, all those things, Caesar worship, all those things, that comes from Babylonian times. That's when Cyrus conquered Babylonia. They founded a new center, Pergamos, and that king became Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of that pagan system in Pergamos. And then the subsequent transfer of the cult from Pergamos to Rome, with the appointment of successive Caesars as high priests. That's why you had to go throw incense on the altar once a year to claim Caesar was the god. In 375 AD, Damasus, the bishop of Rome, completed the absorption of the Babylonianism into the Roman Church. And this is how you must look at this, as how the world marries the church. It's the history of Rome. So Rome was founded before Christ in 753 BC, It subdued Italy in 343 to 272, conquered Carthage in 261-46. Greece, this is how they're spreading. Because remember, from Pergamos they went to Rome. Rome, they start spreading this Caesar worship, Maximus Pontifex, and all these type of leader worship. All right, and Greece, Asia Minor, so it's spreading. Spain, Gaul, Britain, Teutons, spreading more. And then in 63 BC conquered Judea, and they basically made a ring around. You understand? They've surrounded Israel, or the kingdom of God, where God's nation is. In its zenith, it spanned from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. This is the Roman Empire. And from the North Sea to the African desert. A population of 120 million. Some people say more, some people say less. I just took a middle figure. Right? It's Augustus inaugurated emperor worship in order to give the empire a bond of common merit. You understand? To bring the different empires together, the different places together. Although not the seat of imperial and judicial authority, Pergamos became the center of the official religion of emperor worship. The first temple of this cult was erected at Pergamos in 27 BC, before the birth of Christ. Well, before the birth of Christ. Under Vespasian and his successors, it became a test of one's loyalty, if one would or not offer incense to the statue or the altar or the emperor. So we learn Vespasian it's his son who conquers Rome in 70 AD. But Vespasian was in control during the time of, I think just after the time we'll see now. So the rise to the zenith. So from 46 to 44, Julius Caesar, 31 to 14, Augustus. Christ was born in his reign. 20 to 37 AD, Tiberius. Christ was crucified in his reign. Then there's this guy, Caligula. And this guy, you see, this is when Vespasian, Caligula, and them come into being. Because this guy, he made the attempt at a desecration of the temple, what they call the abomination of the thing of abomination in Revelations. He made an attempt to it, but Pontifex, he sent out what you call it, a decree to erect a statue of him in the Holy of Holies. But who was it? It was this guy Pontifex or whatever. Pontifex was the guy that said, it was Pontifex. He was in charge. He was Pretorius. Petronius was the general in charge, and he refused to do it because he said that the Maccabean revolt, he knew history, and he said that would cause a revolt, and the Roman army there wasn't they were far from the empire. It would take days for them to get back up, things like that. So he didn't want to cause trouble. So he refused to do it. So Caligula sends out for him to put to death because he's not listening. But Caligula dies within 2 weeks. And the command to put this guy Petronius to death arrives after the thing of Caligula's death. So he's saved because his death comes first, and then the messenger that says Petronius must be put to death comes afterwards. But it's not listened to anymore because Caligula has died. And things like this. And this is the period that when the Christians fled out of Jerusalem that Jesus speaks about in Luke. I think it's Luke 21. where he says they spread, what we've done in the Olivet Discourse. This is that period when they fled, because Rome was surrounded, but there was a thing around it. You understand? And it's amazing to see there was an attempt of the abomination of the temple, but how God stepped in to stop that, because it's not meant for that time, it's meant for a later time. And that's what becomes very thing. Right? Then it's Claudius 41 to 54, Nero. Nero is the guy who killed Paul, or Paul actually, I think Paul committed suicide or something, but he blaming the burning of Rome on Christians and executed Paul. 68 to 69, Galba, Othing and Vilas. This is the period where the temple was destroyed, AD 70. When Nero died, there were these three guys, but they didn't. So Vespasian goes back, because him and his son have surrounded Jerusalem, and Vespasian goes back to go and run for emperor and whatever, and his emperor tells his son to conquer Rome. But that gap is a year and a bit. That's a gap spoken about, in Luke. Titus is his name. Titus is from 79 to 81. Then there's this guy Domitian. And man, this guy is violent. Thousands were slain. And he banishes John to Patmos. After him is Trajan. And he still made Christianity illegal. But he releases John from banishment on Patmos. He releases John to go back. And then there's Hadrian, and then there's Antiochus Pius, the Bar Kokhba revolt, and those things. And then there's this Marcus Aurelius. This is basically the peak. The Marcus Aurelius is the gladiator one, the movie The Gladiator. And then it starts falling after that. Rome becomes a falling commodity. Commodius, the Barrack emperors, appointed by army civil war, and then it's Septimius Severus, and then it's Caracalla. He tolerated Christianity, so you see now Christianity is starting to come in. Elagabalus, he tolerated Christianity. Alexander Servius, he also tolerated or whatever. But it's this guy that who was at Philip's, very favorable to Christianity. He persecuted Christians. So they're going through this mixture of things. Galatians, he favored. Athenian, Diocletian, he was the worst of them all. He's the one that found the Christians were the scapegoat for everything happening in Rome. He done terrible things to Christians. Alright. After Diocletian, there's this very interesting character, and this is where the real, if you look at all those, there was, they for, they against, there's it's starting to mix, because after the fall, before the fall it was just Rome and the idols. After the fall, it's starting to get this mixture, but it's this guy Constantine. 312 AD, Constantine set out to defeat the forces of Maxentius, the rival of extreme power in the empire. There were 4 generals that were divided. The thing was divided into, and these 4 generals fought against each other in the old end or whatever. But you can go read the history. And the father had prospered when he had prayed to God of the Christians, and Constantine in extremely resorted to the same action. Now there's a story, we don't know if this is true or not, but he said that the day he was going to attack, he saw the shining cross in the sky with an inscription above it, and this inscription said, it's a sign that thou shalt conquer. Alright. And he defeated Maxentius at the whatever bridge, and immediately declared his conversion to Christianity. So Constantine sets out this conversion between his Roman thing and Christianity. And he had a very time. You see, the 325 AD, the Edict of Toleration established freedom of religion. Now, Constantine did favor Christians at court. He exempted Christian ministers from taxes. He issued a general exhortation to all his subjects to become Christians. And things like that. In 330 AD, he moved the capital of the empire to Byzantine, calling it Constantinople. There were so many idol worship, and Rome was so full of idol worship and gods and stuff that he found it better just to move the capital. He didn't bother in trying to please everyone, because he brought out this freedom of religion. So he couldn't please everyone, because some days wanted the Monday, which was the day of the moon, and the Sunday, which was the day of the sun, and things like that. They had all these funny things. So he just moved the capital. He ceased the gladiatorial fights. He reduced the killing of unwelcome children. He abolished crucifixion as form of execution. He repealed the persecution edicts of Diocletian, assumed headship of the church. Now, he starts this, but this is still not the world completely inserted into the church. You'll see the picture as we go ahead. Assumed headship of the church. He was on like these big councils where they decided who was Mary the mother of God, or what is her name. He headed those councils, all these big councils they had in those days. He advanced Christians to high offices. He declared Sunday a day of worship. Most people misunderstand this. You must remember there were 3 different kinds of sun worship in those days. 3 like sects of sun worship. And then the Christians were coming out of the caves. So what he'd done is to immobilize the empire as one. He said, let's make Sunday the day of worship. And he brought in, he forbid anyone to work on a Sunday, and that was the day. You could worship whatever you wanted, but he made a day, and it was Sunday that he made. And he made that day the day of worship. And this was very good news for slaves, because slaves did not have a day off. But he forbid the work on a Sunday. So slaves, for the first time in history, had a day off. And you could go worship whatever you wanted to, but that was the day to go and worship it. Right? So he's brought in, now he's become the head of the church. He's brought in the interdict of the Sunday worship and things like this. You understand? Now we get to the marriage consumed. So we've come through all this Roman history where there was a clear line between if you were Christian or not Christian. What happened to you? Then you got this mixture. Then you got Constantine that brought more definite picture to it. Now you get the marriage. 361 to 363, Julian the Apostate. He sought to restore paganism, but he didn't live very long, and Jovian took over, and he re-established the Christian religion. It is Theodorus made Christianity the state religion. Forced conversion filled the churches with unregenerates. This caused a hell of a problem, because you had all these people, they made Christianity the state religion, so this was forced conversion of people. Now you must remember this, guys like Balaam, who were prophets or soothsayers, still wanted to make money. The guy who was reading the bones still wanted to make money. So what happened was, there was this conversion to Christianity, but not really, because they could still practice what they're doing. So you understand how this is starting to marry, because now these people are people of fame and name and whatever, and they've just been outed by the Christian church, because now it is a state religion. So what they've done is the gifts they had, like the gift of soothsayer, they called prophecy, and they sold it because they still had to make money. Magic was seen as something else. You understand? It was seen as gifts. So the ambition to rule heathenism and pomp emerged in the world church. This grew. And it's still growing today. And then the perverted marriage, heathenism was Christianized. In other words, pagan temples became Christian churches. Heathen festivals were converted into Christian ones. I mean, we saw where the Christmas thing comes from. It comes from burning a Yule log and next morning replacing it with a tree, a trimmed tree. Pagan priests slipped into office as Christian priests. Change was mostly non-nomenclature. What persecution didn't accomplish, the marriage to the world did. You see, Satan tried to crush the church in Smyrna because it's death. He tried to persecute it he wanted to persecute it so it would stand too. But they held fast. So what he done is he changed his tactic. And he made them legal. And he made them the state religion. And he made them important. And he told them they can now go and make money. And they don't even have to pay taxes. And thus destroyed it. It destroyed the whole church. It destroyed everything we know as the church. You see, the blood of the martyr is the seed. The blood of the martyr is our seed, Cain and Abel. Anyway, here's the prophetic view. So the prophetic view is, we said that Ephesus was the apostolic church, that Smyrna was the persecuted church, and that Pergamos is then the married church. And that is the prophetic view. And that married church is going to have a whole lot of consequences down the line. And we're going to see it. It's going to have consequences down this line as Jesus writes the letters, as we understand the different letters. It's going to have consequences in each and every church. I think there's one other church that doesn't really have consequences in, but you can there's a certain thing that prevails there. And we can learn a lot from the prophetic, because we can learn what has happened in our history. So the next letter to the church is Thyatira. So we will be, it's the fourth letter, and we will be going on from there. So join us for more interesting conversation on the churches. Thank you for listening. God bless you.